This is Lightning Power Lunch with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli on Lightning Radio.
I think it just kind of, maybe our defensive game slipped from us a little bit, and that's something we needed to get back on track with, and I think we did a good job at that tonight. I think we were a lot better, and we just got to build off stuff like that. We know we have the offense in this room. That's not the issue, and if we want to do some damage down the road, it's going to have to be in the D zone, and just continue to build off stuff like this.
Build off of it, yes. It's all about building to the playoffs, I think, at this point, partner. Good to see you.
Good to
Thanks
see you,
for,
too.
holding it down yesterday. I know he was with you. Great job, as always. And I was talking to my wife today. How many games left?
11. Wow. Plus playoffs.
Well, we won playoffs. The meaningless games. 11, right?
Hey, they are far from meaningless, my friend.
I know.
I mean,
what
we
is the
still have
magic
a lot
number?
at stake here in terms of seeding and everything else, and the Lightning have not clinched a playoff spot, although Steve had up there.
What is the magic number?
Number is getting smaller.
Do we know what it is? Do we have an update?
Well, I had a conversation with Steve,
Yes.
and I was like, do you want me to mention this on the air? And he's like, eh. So he had up there 11 is the magic number. It's actually 10, and the only reason that it's 10 is because he had the Lightning finishing 1 point ahead of Columbus.
Gotcha.
But they can actually finish tied with Columbus, and Columbus is now in a position to not win the tiebreaker against the Lightning. 10, 11. I mean, the Lightning are closing in. The Islanders lost in regulation last night. I mean, we said these teams are not going to go like 12-0, 13-0.
No.
Down the stretch. Now, it's interesting that I say that because it's kind of like reunion night here for the Lightning, because I saw 3 former Lightning players this morning who are in town for 3 different reasons. Nate Thompson is in town like through the team, and he's meeting with a group tonight, and he's actually recording the block party as we speak.
Yeah.
So we got all kinds of balls in the air. I saw Nate when I walked in. Ryan Callahan is in town, not for ESPN, but he still has his foundation, and they have their big gala tomorrow. So I saw him.
Yeah.
And then Kevin Shattenkirk is in town.
Really?
And he retired, and I saw that he had been brought on by the NHLPA. And so he's here in his capacity as a representative of the NHLPA.
Gotcha.
And so I ran into him, and when I ran into Shattenkirk, we were talking beyond just, hey, what are you up to now?
Yeah.
I had heard he was with the PA, so he was telling me about kind of what's going on. But we were talking a little bit about Utah, and he said, yeah, I was talking to some of the Utah people, and they feel they need to go 11-0 down the stretch to make the playoffs based on how hot St. Louis has gotten. So they're 8 points back. They have 22 available points, so they don't need to go 11-0, but they need to make up at least 8 points on St. Louis, and I'm looking at their game-to-game. They have 1 head-to-head left. It's at St. Louis, game 82.
Right.
So they certainly hope that game matters and means something. They play 6 road games, and they have 5 home games left. They play 3 road games on this trip. Lightning and Panthers back-to-back. It'll be interesting to see if they play Karel Vejmelka both games, and I think they will because he's their guy with Connor Ingram taking a leave of absence. And then they finish at Chicago. Then they play 5 in a row at home. So their 5 remaining home games are all in a row, and then they finish at Dallas, at Nashville, at St. Louis. Last 2 in a back-to-back. That is a tall order to go 11-0. But that's how they're looking at it, and I think we talked about this. I think Eric and I may have talked about it. I can't remember if you and I talked about it, Greg, but I expect that Utah is going to come into this game with an even higher desperation level than what we saw last Saturday, where they played with high desperation because this is it. I mean, it's almost like you're down in a playoff series and you need to win to at least pull yourself into a better position. I think if they lose tonight, they're not mathematically out of it, but it just becomes that much harder because St. Louis has won 7 in a row. They've put themselves in a position where it's going to be very tough for the teams behind them to keep pace and catch them.
And so what does that mean? The Lightning should be expecting a pretty spirited game.
Well,
You
I
know,
think the Lightning should remember what happened last Saturday. I mean, the Lightning are going to have to play at a high level. The Lightning are not going to have, I'm not expecting they're going to have a cakewalk like they did on Tuesday, where they broke the game open early. This should be a different feel of a game, but the Lightning have to understand, whether it's Utah or anyone else, they can't give up the sorts of chances they gave up to Utah in the first meeting. You can't allow those sorts of chances to any opponent.
No.
And Utah made them
That's
pay.
fair. Yeah. That's fair. And to what you said, you know, you take a look at what's happening in the Atlantic Division, and it's I don't want to say it's a mess. I mean, it's a mess in a good way. It's a lot of things still up for grabs. So if you, again, do believe that this year is a little bit more important in terms of seeding and where people need to slot in with who they play and fair, I think that makes some sense. I think this is, if you're the Lightning, you don't take games for granted, but this would be one of those where you say, okay, this is a very winnable game if we play the way we're supposed to play. And what does that mean? I think you heard Brandon Hagel talk about that. It's going to start in their own end. It's going to start with what they're doing to protect the net, in addition to not having some mental lapses when it comes to key moments in a game, which would be, you know, when you score. Make sure that next shift you're okay.
Yeah.
And not taking penalties, because what can be the one great equalizer for two teams who are playing that maybe one is a little more talented or a lot more talented than others, and it would be penalties, you know, power play opportunities. So that'll be something to kind of keep an eye on tonight. We are going to have Matt McConnell on the show, right? Which will be
joining
very
us
fun.
joining us from his hotel room.
Yes.
Utah had a pretty intense practice yesterday, probably after they got in.
Yeah.
So today was an optional, and he popped in this morning, but he said he went back to the hotel early. But he agreed to join us. It's exciting Matt is excited to be still working in the NHL because he had been in Arizona for years, but there was no guarantee that when the franchise moved, they'd take the broadcasters with them. And in fact, Bob Heathouse, their longtime radio announcer in Arizona, did not come to Utah.
Yeah.
So they made a different choice. But McConnell did, and Matt when I saw him in Utah last weekend, he was like, look, I'm just thrilled that I'm still working in the NHL. Understood. Having said all of that, these are really the first meaningful games that this franchise has had since they were in the bubble, and even going before that. I mean, when's the last time that this franchise was playing meaningful games down the stretch in the regular season? It's been a long, long time.
It has been a long time.
So it's a great experience. Yeah. The odds are against them based on how many points back they are and how many teams they need to leapfrog. Calgary and Vancouver are in between Utah and St. Louis. And honestly, if St. Louis is going to fall out of the second wild card, it's probably more likely that Vancouver or Calgary would catch them. But the opportunity is there. And as long as you still have a path, it's exciting. It's exciting hockey. This is a tough back-to-back, though, for Utah. I mean, at Lightning, at Panthers in a back-to-back. You know how they're looking at this, two-game set. Like, this is maybe our season, and this is a huge, huge challenge.
Right. And I think that's fair. I think it's meaningful not only for the short term, but also in the long run for some of these younger players to experience what meaningful games are at the end of the year. And that is something they can build off of moving forward heading into next year. With 11 games remaining for Tampa Bay, it is, I think, a couple of things. One, it's staying injury-free for the most part.
Yeah.
You can do that.
And it looks like Chernak's going to be okay.
Which is good.
After leaving the game early the other night.
That'll be a big deal. I do think finding certain combinations before the playoffs begin, knowing that you're probably going to be changing too because series take on a life of their own and maybe end up having to making a tactical decision with your personnel that you wouldn't typically make. So you understand that. But I do think John Cooper probably would like to have an idea heading into the playoffs what his lines are going to look like. And then maybe it's even a fair question if we still think 11-7, 12-6 is something that's a real debate. Partner, the more I watch the team play, I wonder out loud, is 11-7 the right fit for them? Because I think they've done some good
11-7 definitely looks like the right move when you lose a defenseman halfway through the first period. And then you're like, all right, we lost one of our top minute guys.
Right.
But we're still okay because we got 6. I mean, you don't go into a game thinking you're going to lose a defenseman. You could lose a forward, too. When you lose a forward, you're down to 10. So you're putting more stress on the guys who are playing. But defensemen play more than forwards anyway. Most defensemen play more than most forwards. Kucherov is a unique guy, may play. I mean, he's not going to play as much as Hedman in a game, but he might play more than Lilleberg in a game, potentially. But for the most part, it's harder to replace, just in terms of the minute distribution, it's harder to replace a defenseman who's out of the lineup than a forward, unless you have the extra D-man in there. And then, you can take that body blow a little bit more easily. But I think the Lightning like the 11-7 just because they like their 7 defensemen and they like the flexibility of rotating that third forward on the one line. That is the 2 forwards, which in this current iteration, it's the 4th line. It's the Gergensons Glendening line.
That's
Earlier
true.
in the year, it was kind of the top 6 that they were using with the line of 2 forwards, often Hagel and Cirelli, and then a rotating third forward.
So I think those are some things that would be what I want to look for as the season kind of comes to an end and where things are for the Lightning. And I think if you get some of those answers, I think if you're a Lightning fan, if you're John Cooper, I think you're going to feel pretty secure heading into the postseason where your team is. I still think guys like Bjorkstrand is not struggling to find his game, but probably hasn't made the impact maybe some initially thought when he came over. I think some people just thought he was going to slot in somewhere in the top 6 and he was going to start scoring goals pretty randomly.
Eric and I talked about that yesterday. Eric is I'm a little surprised too. Eric is very surprised they've not used him with Hagel and Cirelli, and Eric expects that they will use him with Hagel and Cirelli down the stretch. I'm less certain because we haven't seen it yet, and it's not happening tonight. In that they ran the lines, and Bjorkstrand is with Gonçalves and Gord. So, yes, Coop is experimenting, but Coop also will keep a line intact if he likes what he's getting from that line generally.
Yeah.
And we touched on this yesterday on the show, Greg, but I think Bjorkstrand will start producing when he can find opportunities to get his wrist shot off. He just hasn't had a lot of shot attempts during this time with the Lightning. That wrist shot is such a huge weapon that when he starts finding ways to get loose, by loose I mean give himself an opportunity to get the shot off where there's nobody in front of him, he's not being checked at that particular moment, we're going to start to see pucks go in. It's that good. It's that big of a weapon. But it's almost like the pistol is loaded, but he hasn't been able to fire it yet, right? With a couple of exceptions, he's hit some posts when he's let that wrist shot go. And that's not really going to be suitable for where they were using him on the power play, where it was more of a one-timer situation.
Are we surprised he hasn't been able to get that shot off? I don't know what to make of that,
Yeah, I mean, I think that he just hasn't been in a position to be open, and he's not trying to force it. He's a smart player. Also, I think, he is adjusting. It's the first time that he was ever traded mid-season. The other time he was traded from Columbus to Seattle, it happened during the offseason. And I think his game has been fine. Like, his game has been good. It's just that after scoring the first game, he hasn't scored since. So where is that offense? I think that offense is going to come when we start seeing him get that shot off more regularly.
It's his biggest shot. And I know we've talked about it on the power play and being able to get loose there, and it just hasn't.
But on the power play, Greg, he's set up to shoot a one-timer. I think his biggest weapon is when he can wrist it. In other words, not the one-timer.
Sure.
Like, it's on his stick blade. Either he's stopping it, settling it, and shooting it, or he has it, and he makes a move to get open, and he shoots it.
Yeah.
The way they were working the power play, that probably wasn't going to be available for him. So he was going to have to basically shoot via the one-timer, which, we've seen him shoot the one-timer. It's hard.
Sure.
He's got some mustard on it, but that's not really his bread and butter based on, what I've seen from the guy.
His bread and butter
I
is
shouldn't
just
say
let it rip.
bread and butter, but
Yeah.
his most dangerous asset as a scorer is the wrist shot.
Mm-hmm. And that
And
makes
so
some sense.
last game,
Yeah.
they kind of moved him to power play 2. Hagel was back on power play 1.
Right. So I think that's, to me, because I think Yanni Gourde has probably given you what you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much offense you were expecting from Yanni Gourde at this point. I think you wanted him to be on the forecheck. You wanted him to be aggressive and
I think he's
provide
chipped
that.
in like 6 assists so far.
Yeah, I mean he's been. I'm curious what our fans think. Have those two basically been what you expected, particularly Gourde? Because I think that's basically what my expectation was of him. Bjorkstrand, I think, was a little bit of the wild card because you were looking for that offense. But I agree with you. I think when you take a look at the wrist shot, I do think that's an area we haven't seen unleashed yet. And hopefully we do starting tonight.
Yeah.
TB Sports Fan, before we get to Matt, says, do you think we could see Max Crozier down the stretch here? He's turned into a beast in Syracuse.
Yeah, I've seen that he's had a fight or two. He's having a good year in Syracuse. The answer to the question is, I don't know. Right now, I mean, they sent Halverson back, so Johansson looks like he's going to back up tonight, Greg, which means Cam Atkinson is back in the lineup. Lightning don't have a lot of cap room now down the stretch in the regular season. Syracuse they're not like totally secure, but it does look like Syracuse will make the playoffs. If Syracuse makes the playoffs, Crozier will play for Syracuse in the playoffs. If the Lightning are still playing when Syracuse is no longer playing, I think we'll see Crozier up. I'm not sure if it's going to happen before then, though.
Yeah.
Unless there are injuries.
Sure. Matt McConnell is with us on the line, and we're very appreciative of the time that he's taken to talk to us because he's a very busy man. Matt, how are you, sir? And, we're talking about the Lightning and things to improve on heading into the stretch run here, and we were talking about Utah. Still a lot to play for, although they got to run the table, but it's exciting, I think, for them, for you, that they're at least sniffing a playoff spot here.
You know what? Life is good. I, as you guys know or may not, I know Dave knows, I'm sure you know this, Greg, I spent a lot of time in Atlanta, so there's a Publix right across the street from where we're staying.
Did you get a sub?
Because I had my chance to go get a Publix sub today. Nothing better on this planet in terms of a lunch break. So it was good. Yeah, no, it's fun. It's been a lot of fun with the whole group here. They've got a couple of games in hand on St. Louis, but St. Louis just refuses to lose games, right? So it's part of the growing process. You know what I mean? And I think the core that is in Utah compared to the group that was in Arizona has only grown, has only gotten deeper. So, and now, they have the ability to spend money, right? So it's going to be one of those deals, I think, where, they're only going to continue to get better. Now, this season is not over by any means, and it's been fun to be in the playoff race, but this is a daunting 24 hours or a little more than 24 hours with the Lightning tonight and then going across the Everglades over to Florida. It's definitely going to be a tough back-to-back.
So, of course, the Lightning and Utah were involved in the big offseason deal involving Sergachev, Moser, Geekie. So, Mikhail Sergachev is certainly an addition to what Arizona had last year. But a lot of the players who are playing on Utah were in Arizona previously.
Right. Yeah.
And this team is doing better than Arizona had done, certainly in the last few years. Can you pinpoint, like, what has been the difference beyond maybe this is part of it, playing in a building with a lot of energy and, the new city and all of that, but maybe in addition to that or beyond that, like, why is this team closer to the playoff cut line than it had been when it was in Arizona?
Well, you know what, Dave, that's a great question. I think it's a couple of things. First of all, I think it's the natural maturation, right, of guys like Clayton Keller and Dylan Guenther, and we saw what Logan Cooley is going to be last year. We saw glimpses, a little bit of foreshadowing there, and he's followed it up with another great season. But I think, and you referenced the Sergachev trade, that we talked about it, I believe, in Utah last week a little bit about how that was a really good deal for both teams, right? So the other part of it, not only the maturation, they completely revamped their blue line. Nothing against Josh Brown, nothing against Troy Stetcher, nothing against some of the guys that had been here prior to the move to Utah. But when you can add a Mikhail Sergachev, when you can add a veteran that blocks a ton of shots like Ian Cole, when you can bring in an Ole Mata when it looked kind of bleak at the beginning of the year, when John Marino, who, by the way, was another addition, he was out on the lineup. Sean Dursey was out on the lineup. I think it's made a huge, huge difference. And it's helped Karel Vejmelka. It's helped Connor Ingram, whoever's been in goal. So I think those are the two things. I think it's just a kind of the natural maturation of the group and just a much better back end. I got to tell you, I was pretty bummed when JJ Moser left, because I thought JJ was really good, just kind of a under the radar guy that plays hard, that can move the puck, a guy that, if he has to drop the gloves, like he's done it, and I don't know if he's done it in Tampa this year, but he's proven that he can handle himself. So, but getting a Mikhail Sergachev it's been huge, because he plays in all he's 5-on-5. He's a PK guy, power play. I'm not telling you guys anything that you don't know already. And it's amazing how many times this Utah group will win a faceoff killing a penalty, and Sergachev is the one that sends it all the way down the ice. I don't know if that was the case in Tampa, but he was he's just been a really good fit and a really good addition.
It's interesting, Matt, when you have a team who's trying to find that identity, playing meaningful games can benefit them in so many ways. Do you get the sense that you're starting to see the vision that management wants this team to be, and you've got your core in place, and now it's about really surrounding them with capable veterans in addition to gaining that experience come playoff time?
Yeah, Greg, they're legitimately, I think they're going through it here for the first time, right?
Yeah.
There were times in Arizona where this team would be at the top of the Pacific Division at Christmas, and then they'd have a horrible run in the second half, and it would knock them out. And last year, the news broke in Utah, and I'll never forget this. We were in Sunrise, Florida, and it went right through the locker room, and they lost. They didn't win a regulation game, I think, in 13 or 14, and that was it. That was it. It was a real tough stretch for the team. Yeah, I think they could use another defenseman. I think they could, obviously the center position is so coveted by everybody, but they could probably use another center. I think Bill Armstrong, the team general manager, has followed his blueprint. He's done a really solid job of not being enticed with inflationary players on July 1st, not being enticed with giving up a lot at the trade deadline. That's not his MO. Like, his MO is doing deals in the offseason, like he did with the Lightning in the Sergachev deal. So it's not anymore a case where they've got massive holes to fill. I think they're now in the tweak stage, right? I think they could get a little bit bigger as they move forward. They're not the biggest group. Jack McBain's got good size. Kevin Stenlund signed a 2-year deal, so he'll be around next year. He's got size, but maybe a little more size up front. But I think they're through. The proverbial light is at the end of the. You could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think they're getting to that position. It was funny. a year ago, we were playing the Wild, and I was talking to one of their players in Tempe, or one of their broadcasters in Tempe. And, he could tell my frustration going through that long losing streak that I referenced. And he just looked at me and he said, "You know what, Matt, it's not your time yet." And I thought that made so much sense. It kind of caught me off guard, but it just wasn't their time. Now they've made some deals. Now they brought in, every player that they brought in has a Stanley Cup pedigree. Mikhail Sergachev, Ole Mata, Ian Cole, Kevin Stenlund, they've all won cups, right? And I think that's by design, to try to create that great leadership group to bring along the Logan Cooley's and the Dylan Guenther. So I think they're a lot further along than they were. And now I think they have the ability to push it forward or move it forward based on the great ownership we have in Utah.
Maybe in a way you answered this next question I'm going to ask, but when you kind of look at like, how do teams go through these cycles and manage to navigate through these cycles where, you have a window that's open, it closes, you go through some really tough years, you get high draft picks, you get some really good young players. The idea is that they're going to be your leaders, you get good again, and hopefully, you open the window again. And we've seen that with Arizona/Utah. There are a lot of examples of teams, though, that have had this, but they haven't been able to move forward. You think of Buffalo.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the year for Ottawa, but they've had these high draft picks for a number of years. There's no question they're talented, but the organization hasn't really taken a step forward. And then there are the other examples, like Dallas is a team that did it, right? Like they got those 3 guys in the 2017 draft, corner piece players, and in short order, they became not only a playoff team, but a cup contender. Like, what do you make of that? And where is Arizona, Utah kind of on that spectrum in terms of like having the young players, but also building the organization, moving the organization in the right direction?
Well, Dave, I think obviously it's scouting. We all know that, and you got to have quality people, and I really do think Utah's got a great staff. But I think it's patience, and it takes a long time. It takes the National Hockey League at one point, 16 of 21 teams qualified for the playoffs, right? Now it's 16 of 32, and if they expand, it's probably, the odds are going to get that much tougher simply because it doesn't seem like there's an appetite to expand the number of teams that qualify for the postseason. But I don't care what the plan is. I think you gotta have the support of ownership to step up at times to help the group, to fortify the group. But I don't care what your plan is. Just stick with it, right? And I think that's what Bill has done. He learned that in St. Louis when he was an assistant general manager there, and helped that whole group win a Stanley Cup not too long ago. So I think it's I think you just gotta stick with the plan. The other part of it is when Bill Armstrong came to Arizona, and now obviously on to Utah, what he wanted to do was he wanted to build a ladder of picks. So if you go back and you look at the bad contracts that they took and the fact that they took on a bunch of bad Vancouver contracts that got a draft pick that turned into Dylan Guenther, what he did was he built a picks ladder. So there for a while, 3 years out, you'd see 12 picks in this draft, 14 picks in this draft, 11 picks in this draft, right? And so he built a picks ladder. And I think this is my opinion. I think you almost have to do that with your roster, right? You can't have everybody that's 32 years old. You can't have everybody that's 21 years old. You've got to build the layers and then reinforce it with guys that can help the group and other players that probably fill a specific need. The Utah team is much better defensively this year. I think at times they're a little bit challenged to have that one player get over the hump, or maybe they're a little bit challenged in in scoring goals, even though their goals for are way up compared to what we've seen before. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I think it's multi-layered. But I really do think that you've got to have players, that are there for the long run, the core, but then you've got other guys that you can bring in, swap out, and kind of work around the fringes a little bit.
You've seen this in different markets, and when you get a high draft pick like a Logan Cooley and you want to see him become a stepping stone, what have you seen as the difference from year 1 to year 2? Because he was really impressive in the last game these two teams played, but you got to hit on those picks, and when you do, it really sets you up for the future, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that was the Mishkov draft, right? If I remember correctly. And well, with Logan in year 1, it was where he really turned the corner, Greg, was his defensive play. The year before, Clayton Keller took a massive step in his two-way game because he was really he figured out the defensive side of it, and Keller realized that by stripping pucks and back checking through the neutral zone and filling that lane, that he could strip pucks and turn that into offense. And last year as a rookie, I think Clayton Keller Logan Cooley probably needed Google Maps to find the defensive zone. He was a wreck. He was prolific from day one offensively, but he didn't have a clue defensively on how to play the game. And right around Christmas, first of the year, a season ago, he started to figure it out, and it was amazing to watch how good his defensive game elevated. And he's brought a lot of that back with him in his sophomore season. So that's been the biggest difference from Logan. He's so skilled. He's got a great shot. I think he thinks the game very, very well. They've got a few guys on this roster that can hound pucks defensively. You watch Josh Doan tonight. You will come away on a typical night of watching Josh Doan. You'll be amazed at his stick. Like his stick is my partner Dominic Moore, former Lightning great. He thinks he's got a top 5 stick in the league already, and it's amazing because he rarely takes a stick penalty. It's crazy. So yeah, but Logan Cooley has figured it out on both sides, and he may be like, I go back and forth him and Dylan Gunther and a few of these guys. He may end up being the best out of this group when it's all said and done.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it should be a good game tonight, Matt. We appreciate all of the time you've taken to talk hockey with us. Enjoy that public sub, and it's always good to connect.
It's gone.
Oh, you already ate? What kind did you get? What kind did you get? I gotta know. What did you get?
So Mike Folta, our radio guy, he's like, you gotta go chicken. You gotta go the chicken fingers or chicken strips and all this. I'm like, no, I'm a plain guy. I want white bread. I went turkey, and I want lettuce, mayo, and mustard.
Nothing wrong with that. Do you get chips with it too? Do you get chips with it?
Yeah, I threw in some chips. Absolutely.
Yeah, you have to.
And you know what? I was listening to you guys a little bit in the waiting room, and you guys have a great show. This is awesome. Anytime you need me, just let me know.
Love it. Always good to connect with somebody from Pittsburgh too that did some games here. We always appreciate that.
That's right. Go Mount Lebanon. Let's go. Go Broncos today.
That's right. That's right. Let's get it going. All right, Matt. Thank you, sir. We appreciate you, Matt McConnell.
Guys. See you tonight.
Matt McConnell joining us. Yeah, we appreciate everything he's done and hopping on, breaking it down. Partner, are you there? Or are you off camera?
Yeah, so we had a Stella malfunction. She got so excited by Matt McConnell that she walked under the table and
knocked you off
the camera. So, Steve, I can actually use if you want, I can just use my my laptop camera. You don't want me to do that?
You were like the voice of Oz. Like I couldn't see you, but like I could hear you, and I was like, "There's Mitch."
I know,
and that is good. But I think you and I were both impressed with Cooley. And, for teams like Arizona, you brought up a good point about Buffalo. Detroit, I think, is another example. You do have to hit on some of these picks. I don't know where Keller comes down for you in terms of superstars. Solid. He's just a good player. He had a player.
He had a career year a couple of years ago, and he had fantastic numbers. Yeah. I mean, if he hustles this year and has a really strong finish, he may be able to match those numbers. But he's their captain.
Yep.
He's a very, very good player. They have some very, very good young players. Dylan Guenther can shoot the puck. Cooley is immensely talented, and Matt talked about, the evolution of his two-way game, and the same with Keller, but that may have happened a couple of years ago. And you know what? Nick Schmaltz, don't fall asleep on him. He's good. He's been around a little bit longer, but he's definitely a top 6 for them. And when I said that they kind of had much of the same team as before, I was neglecting to mention they added Ian Cole and Mata. And those additions really helped fill out what they wanted to do in terms of their blue line. But, they had to go, I think, 50-some-odd games without Dursey, who was part of their D-core last year, and they survived that. So he's back now and helping.
Yeah, for sure. It is the one position where if you can add a few quality veteran players, the back end, I think that really does go a long way. And you take a look at their back end, they do have some experience. Mata has played a long time in this league, even though he's relatively young. Ian Cole was a steady force for the Lightning, and he's been that way for a number of years. John Marino is a guy who has, some NHL experience, but he's still young enough where I think he could probably get to another level. And, I do think, it's a situation where if they can complement some of the younger players, that goes a long way, 2, 3, 4 years down the road as those players mature into legitimate NHLers on a consistent basis. So
I'm back, by the way, for those audio listeners who were wondering what we were talking about. Well, Jared has been juggling all these different balls, so he came in with all this gear, and Stella was like, I don't really think I like the look of this rolling toward me, so let me just go under this table. And, she's a 90-pound dog, so she didn't really care that there were wires there. So I think Steve is ready to pull out some hair follicles, either his or mine, which may be related to me bringing the dog in. The dog was a big hit at the skate today until that moment when she disrupted our camera feed. But thank you to Matt for joining us. Great guy. And I'm really glad that he landed on his feet and is enjoying Salt Lake City too. I mean, we had a chance to catch up beyond the hockey stuff, and it's a beautiful place to live, and he's enjoying it very much.
Anthony says, I have the same thoughts as you guys about line combinations. Just want to see all variations. Why we didn't get Cooch media scrum? He was pretty talkative. Vasi is the best in the world. Classic, and even suspended Ben Pierce from his media availability. Pretty funny. That was pretty funny. That was tremendous when he did that. He called out Ben Pierce.
Because Ben started asking him a question before he finished answering the previous one.
Do we have that soundbite? I told Steve we got to get that clip and just drop that into the show whenever, because that was pretty funny.
No. Steve said they don't have it.
Okay. Come on, Jared.
Well, look, it was, we kind of talked about this on the show yesterday. What an historic game for Kucherov, though, as he eclipsed 100 points. He reached 70 assists. He became the first Russian player ever with 5 100-point seasons. So
you were
just
stunned
continue.
by that.
I was surprised, not that he's done it 5 times, but that he's the only Russian to have done it.
Yeah, that he leads it. I had an idea with that in terms of the numbers because, I followed and still do Malkin's career quite a bit.
Yeah, how is it that he only has 3? That seems weird.
Well, he's been injured. He's been injured a lot. It's interesting if you look at
20
Malkin's
years he's
numbers,
played, though, Greg.
Yeah, but if you look at Malkin's numbers, he's had it's really been highs and lows. There have been years where he's had those 300-point seasons.
Yeah.
Then there's been years where he's played 40 or 50 games, and so he's in that 70-point mark.
Right.
He's above a point per game. He just hasn't. Look at his games played to Ovechkin's. I made this comment to Eric. And if you average out what Malkin would produce on a year-by-year basis with those games he's missed, he would be very close to how many points Ovechkin has. And I think that's an interesting thing to kind of keep in mind. Cooch has been really durable.
Yeah.
And he's been dominant,
he missed a whole season. He missed one whole season.
He missed one whole season. But, he, again, it's a quiet 1-2 point night showing for him most nights because he slows things down at such an incredible clip. But I think it's I think he, when his playing days are done, if he stays relatively healthy, will go down as the highest scoring Russian of all time.
Yeah.
I think he will be.
Well,
that.
he's well on his way to that. I mean, and the other thing that, this is the other side of the coin, that Russians really started coming into the NHL in the 90s, which coincided soon after the 90s started with the dead puck era. So when the NHL was having its highest scoring period of time, maybe up until this current generation,
right.
it was the 1980s, and there were very few Russian players. I mean,
Sure.
none at the beginning, and then, a few as we got into the late 80s. So, like Sergei Fedorov, immensely, immensely talented.
For sure.
And scored a lot. But, he was in Detroit when things were starting to get a little tighter defensively. You haven't said that. I should look up his numbers. I feel like he would have hit 100 points more than
Kovalev.
4 times.
Kovalev's, if you remember, he was on the Rangers.
Yeah,
92,
the word
I
they
think.
used to describe Kovalev is enigmatic, right?
Yeah. Because his numbers on the surface, if you looked at his numbers, you could say, I can make a case he's a Hall of Famer on the surface, because I think he's close to 500 goals. I think he has over 1,000 points. But you felt like that was a guy with all the talent he had.
Yeah.
That he could have been somebody
more.
600 goals for sure. He was on that Rangers team, partner, that won the
as
Cup
a
in
young
92.
pup. Yeah,
as
that
a
was
young
the
pup.
beginning of his career.
Yeah. And, I can remember when the Penguins traded for him. And I think that was the Nedved trade. Remember Peter Nedved, who was also an extremely talented player. And Kovalev just blossomed. Because they basically, in Pittsburgh, said, just do what you want to do.
Right.
He had a shot. He could skate.
His stick
And
handling was sublime.
He had all the tools in the toolbox.
Yeah.
You almost felt like he was bored. Like he was that talented. I also think he's a certified pilot as well.
Interesting.
Like he can fly his own plane.
Victor Hedman has an interest in that too. I think
Does
Hetty,
he?
I don't know if he has actually finished his training to get his own license.
Yeah. But yet Bure, McGillney.
Bure,
I mean, you had some really high-end players. Bure just, I don't think, did it over an extended period of time. Like he was really, really good for.
Bure's overall numbers are not as high as you might think based on the talent level there.
I mean, he was dynamite for a handful of years for sure. So I think those are some interesting things to keep in mind. But anyways, that was
So congratulations.
I don't know how we got
to
down that
Cooch.
rabbit hole.
Well, we were talking about his
Russian
his
players
3-point night
Yeah.
the other night, and Cirelli, his 500th game, had 2 goals, and tonight is Ryan McDonagh's 1,000th game. There was a very loud
That's a milestone.
acknowledgement at the end of the skate. They had McDonagh kind of lead the stretch in the middle of the circle, and everyone around the circle like bang their sticks on the ice, and it was noisy. Like they are so happy for this guy. Just goes to show not only does he mean a lot to the team in terms of what he does on the ice, like he means a lot to the team beyond the ice, right? So
For sure.
Just making sure the dog is not moving again. So Stella didn't get the memo that we are now on a camera in the studio.
Look, she wants some airtime too.
I think she was just afraid of the big. She's probably bigger than that case that Jared rolled in, but she was like, "This thing is moving. I'm not certain what to make of this. Oh, I'm caught up in this wire, and I'm just gonna pull it." Anyway, studio hijinks aside,
it happens.
It should be a good game tonight. I would think the Lightning will be ready to match the intensity, but I mean, I was talking about how Utah was viewing this game without actually having talked to anyone on Utah, just because I'm looking at the situation.
Sure.
I'm like, this is it for them. And Matt said it. It's like, this is going to be a defining 24 plus hours for Utah. That's how the other side is looking at this game tonight. Not because it's the Lightning. I mean, partially because it's the Lightning. They're on the road, Utah, facing a playoff-bound team. But their situation, it's a tough stretch in their schedule, and they cannot afford to let points slip through their fingers.
Wholeheartedly agree with you on that. Scott says, I suspect poor Ben just assumed Cooch was giving one of his patented 1 or 2 word answers. Who knew Cooch was gregarious that night? That would be true. Anthony says, I have the same thoughts as you guys about line combinations. That's kind of piggybacking off his previous comments. TB Sports Fan says, one option for Bjorkstrand to get a shot off would be putting him up high on the power play, sort of above Kucherov and next to Hedman, with Hedman moving down to the left circle when needed. Bjorkstrand then would be able to score from distance. So TBA Sports Fan says the setup would be point in the bumper, Gensel behind the net, Kucherov the right circle, Hedman point moving into left circle if needed, and Bjorkstrand top of right circle. So getting into details there.
I don't think the Lightning are going to look at that just because the right side of the ice is Kucherov's side, and Kucherov likes to kind of go north and south.
Yeah.
To the top of the circle, to the bottom of the circle. Also, I can't really say I can remember seeing a power play look that way. Now, putting Bjorkstrand on his strong side in the power play, which he is not on that side on power play 2. They have Cirelli at that right circle. But what they call having a downhill power play, where basically you're running at least part of the power play
right
through a guy who was on his strong side. That's when we talked about Kucherov on the left, which the Lightning, they've used that very intermittently this year. Kucherov prefers to be on the right. But Kucherov on the left, that would be a downhill power play because you can start at the top of the circle on your forehand. It's along the boards. You can protect the puck. You can skate down. You can be in motion and try and get the penalty kill box moving. And that might set up a play. But if you're not actually skating downhill, then you can actually control the puck and shoot a wrist shot. Like Brandon Hagel at the left circle on this current setup is going to have a hard time shooting a one-timer. He could shoot a wrist shot. So they could put Bjorkstrand at the right circle as a righty shooter. But we haven't seen that. I think it's more about, like, is he going to be able to get the shot off 5-on-5? And let's see if he can. He needs to find space. I don't think that he's playing poorly. I think this is just one element of his game that hasn't really clicked into place yet. But when it does, based on how well he can shoot the puck with the wrist shot, I think we're going to start to see pucks go in.
It's like a shooter in basketball that needs a little separation.
He needs a little separation.
Just a little separation to get that thing off. Now you're contending with guys who are blocking shots, and that all becomes chaotic at times. But I would agree with you on that. Jay says, need a Lightning win tonight. Also, Michigan State plays tonight in the NCAA tournament. Excited to watch Isaac Howard play again.
Yeah, Eric was saying the game is at 4:30, so maybe it's in the afternoon. Well, if that's the case, it is in the afternoon.
Interesting.
The game should be wrapping up unless there's overtime around the time that the Lightning start against Utah.
Yes. Look, there's next to Crozier, has there been another player that we've talked more about than Howard? And I think that's picked up
Well, it's exciting. It's exciting
to
have a prospect in the system who is gaining this kind of prominence as an amateur.
Well, and do you think part of this and a lot of this is the potential for him to play this year for the Lightning?
Yeah.
Do you think that's been
fans
manufactured?
Are looking at it that way.
I was going to say, do you think that's manufactured, or do you think, if you had to guess, do you think maybe there's some talk internally that the Lightning would potentially do something like that?
I mean, it could happen. I have to be honest, I would be surprised if Howard joins the Lightning, but if Howard joins the Lightning and just like takes over the league.
He's in the top 6.
I mean, those are unreasonably high expectations. Would I love to see it? Of course I would. But I would be surprised if we see that outcome. It may be about the excitement of potentially having Howard join the Lightning down the stretch run and into the playoffs, but it may just be even beyond that, just having a high-end prospect that they've drafted.
Right.
Who will be joining their organization soon.
You can never have enough talented players in your organization. And the Lightning, I think, feel really good about where they are. You always want more down in Syracuse. But as I said to you, and I think we've talked about it, one of the themes this year, in addition to how the Lightning have performed at the NHL level, and how they've been very good metrically across the board has been their ability to replenish the system with players who are doing well in Syracuse, but also who've come up and made an impact on this team. Gonsalves is probably the best example. But, you've got Geeky, who we've seen this year. And then you start talking about guys like Crozier and Howard. And we saw Dylan Duke for a brief stint. But I just rattled off 4 or 5 names, partner, that to various degrees are going to have and already have had an impact on the Lightning and the core players that are currently on this team. And I think that's really hard to do. It's challenging. And I think what gives the Lightning an opportunity to stay relevant, of course, are the core players that they have in place continuing to play at a high level. But I do think if you want to take the next step from becoming a playoff team to a contending team, I do think you need a wave of new players coming in that aren't free agents, that can make your team younger, faster, and have a little more edge to their game and who are hungry. And I think you do that by bringing in those guys in. So Lilleberg, Crozier, Howard eventually, Duke, Gonsalves. All you need them to do, Dave, is you want them to produce, but you need them to bring a certain type of energy. Because that allows you, I think, to not push the core group, but certainly on nights when things aren't clicking, if you have some young guys who are just eager to show what they can do on a nightly basis, sometimes that can carry over into a game. And I think at various levels this year we've seen that. But it's really hard to do, and it's why I think Julien Brisebois, when you have conversations of GM of the year, this is one of the reasons why I would look at him as saying, look what he's done. Mm-hmm. Nobody envisioned the Lightning's minor league system producing some players who can come in here and develop and do well, and he's done that. And he's done it on a consistent basis.
And this isn't quite in the same category, but I think it needs to be mentioned because, to me, he's having his best season in the NHL, and he's had a couple of really good years previously in the NHL. Brandon Hagel is approaching, if not superstar status, like elite status. And it's not just because he's a guy that was, on this Four Nations face-off Canada team. I mean, the expectation, I think, would be then he's on Team Canada for the Olympics next year. But look at the impact that he is having game in, game out. Look at his stats. Look at the role that he has on this team.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about most valuable player. We had that discussion earlier in the week. You remember, Greg? And we're like,
sure.
Ryan McDonagh is very, very valuable to the Lightning. Brandon Hagel's value to the Lightning cannot be overstated. And, he was a guy the Lightning acquired back in 2022 at the age of 24 years old. I don't think anybody who looked at that trade,
none,
could have said Brandon Hagel at 24 would turn into the Brandon Hagel that we see today. So how did that happen? Well, part of it is him, right? But part of it is the Lightning have enabled him to develop in a way that he has become, I mean, you don't want to say a superstar, fine, but he is a top player in the NHL.
He is. Yeah, he is.
He's one of the best players in the NHL.
Yeah. I mean, if you go
and
by...
people were squawking about the Lightning giving up 2 first-round picks to get him at the time. It seems hard to believe that was the argument against it. But, he's still, he's in the prime of his career.
Yeah.
He's in his mid to late 20s.
I agree. And
I mean, I put him in that same category when you're talking about, younger players bringing fresh blood. And, yes, you can draft them and develop them. You can also find them, like they found Lilleberg.
Yeah.
They drafted Crozier. They drafted Howard. They drafted Duke. They drafted Gonsalves. But Hagel's not that much older than any of those guys. He's got such a long runway ahead of him. And I mean, he has turned into one of the top players in the league. And the Lightning have him. That's what some of these other clubs are missing. Maybe they're getting the number 3 overall pick, the Logan Coolies, right? what they're missing are these guys that kind of come out of nowhere, right? And either through development or just being in the right situation, kind of grab the ball and run with it.
Yes.
He and Cirelli have a special kind of chemistry too, so I think that they help each other. But
I agree.
I mean, I think we need to mention that it's not just Kucherov and Point and Hedman and Vasilevsky and the guys that you think of when you think of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Brandon Hagel is now an elite player in the NHL.
I would agree. We talked about Keller, and he's a really good player. I mean, you can make the case Hagel's on that level. Is on that level of Keller, and Keller's been the face of that franchise for a little bit. So it kind of gives you an idea of where Hagel is. And then, look, Nick Paul not too far behind in terms of his development.
I think so. So they aren't the same. I mean, if you were to ask me to Clayton Keller has a playmaking gene that I'm not sure Hagel has, but Hagel has a tenacity to his game and a straightforward component to his game that makes him extremely difficult to play against.
Yeah.
And he can make plays.
For sure.
So I'm not saying he maybe doesn't have kind of the silkiness of a Keller. Keller's got a silkiness to his game, a smoothness to his game. Hagel's got an in-your-face quality to his game. But that's fine, because it works for him, and it makes him extremely valuable.
It's a hard game to play, what he does.
Yeah.
But, man, it is effective.
How about that check that he laid on Grzelcyk? I'm glad that Grzelcyk is okay, but
right.
That was just speed, determination, and straight line hockey.
And Hagel can drop the gloves. Not that that's a thing. Did Matt say that Moser can drop the gloves too?
Yeah, I was surprised to hear that.
I'm gonna have to go on YouTube and check some things out. Because he doesn't look like somebody that would be handling his business. We know Sergachev can fight.
Yes,
Sergachev. So you have some guys who can handle their business a little bit, and that'll be interesting. I don't know if that'll be on display tonight, but look. Utah's fighting for something, and I think the Lightning want to continue to munch some points and keep pace with Florida and Toronto, because that's going to be those. You feel like the standings are going to keep juggling a little bit here.
And this game, and then the next two for the Lightning,
for
sure, and maybe the next three for the Lightning if we're going to include Ottawa in this category. Ottawa's got a little bit more breathing room, but for sure, you got Utah, Islanders.
Yep.
These next three games, the Lightning are going to be facing two teams, but they see the Islanders in a home and home that are going to be laying it all out on the line.
Well,
it should make for entertaining hockey if the Lightning can match the level that the other team is throwing at them.
I think that's the key. I think it should keep the Lightning sharp, depending on how they play these games and finish things out. And that could be different. All right, so we got the game tonight. Pre-game at 6:30. Puck drops at 7. I'll catch you down at the arena, and I will be speaking to you and Phil a little closer to the puck dropping. We'll get Phil's thoughts on everything. We got Chief back tonight. Hopefully his voice is ready to rock and roll.
I even thanked him for being on the air, and I was like, wait a minute, I didn't even see Chief. Was he under the weather?
Yeah, he had his, it's his voice. I think his voice went a little bit. He said he was fine, but his voice, sometimes that happens.
Yeah, that does happen sometimes. Hopefully he is recovered.
Hopefully he's recovered, and we'll talk to him.
Yes, he'll be with us tonight.
Good. And we will talk to our audience tomorrow in this same setting. We'll take your questions and kind of recap the game and see how things played out. Partner, great job as always. And I will talk to you tonight.
Talk to you tonight.
Thanks to Matt McConnell as well for hopping on. We always appreciate when we can get guests on the show. Steve Versnick and Jared Johnson. I'm Greg Linnelli. We'll be with you again tomorrow. You have been listening to Power Lunch on Lightning Radio.